Friday. It's not Friday, sorry, Tuesday morning. We've we've been a little delayed because of because there was a bit of illness last week and stuff, but we're here. And today we're talking about the starving artist. And we're going to talk about Van Gogh in particular, because he's an example that it springs to mind when you talk about starving artist. Am I live now, just out of
Yes,
interest?
you are, Debs.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a take two, but you don't need to worry about it at home. That's why we're slightly late. Um, so the reason that we wanted to talk about this is because from the very, very beginning of this Art Alchemy podcast, we've talked about doing this episode, but never done it. And that's partly because a lot of people don't go into art. They'll come to us later in life, or they'll say, "Oh, I wish that." Oh, I've got the chat up now as well. I
Oh,
like
good. Good. That's nice.
if anybody is out there, please do put something in the chat so we know what's going on, because you'd think that we'd be used to it by now because we've done a few lives, but we're still getting used to it.
Things sort of change around, don't they? And as you change things, then the way that you go live sort of changes as well. But yeah.
Exactly. I tried scheduling this morning, which sort of worked, but I didn't press the button.
It's always the simple things, isn't it, that you're like, oh.
I
Yeah, I
know.
mean, it's something that we spoke about a while ago, isn't it? This because I think it's quite a common myth, like the starving artist, and I think it's definitely something that stops people from going into art. I know people my own age that have said to me, I really enjoyed art at school, but I never went into it because I never saw it as like a viable career path for them.
Mm.
Or even like, I suppose like the financial value in it as well. Because when you link the whole starving artist story to making art, it's like it almost devalues creativity, doesn't it? I think.
Hmm.
Wow.
And I think also the world's changed, so there's quite a lot to unpack there, really.
Oh.
Um, so if we first of all start with, where does the starving artist idea come from? Because when you think in the past, the well-known artists weren't necessarily starving.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about Van Gogh, 'cause there's even more um, to think about there, because he had a mental health issue. So you also have another myth, which is to do with the fact that, creativity and mental health and all of those sorts of things. Um, it's understandable, because you do see, if you think about musicians that become incredibly popular, they can sometimes struggle, can't they?
Yeah, and I think I don't think it's a cause of being I think it's maybe to do with the fact that as artists, whether you're a visual artist or a musician, um, I think you see the world differently. And I think you're also like super sensitive to everything around you. And I think that's what creates the art because you see more, you tap into more, you feel more, you want to express that. I feel like I need to paint, I need to physically do that as part of what everyday sort of life. And I think the nature of that being a sensitive person in a world that maybe doesn't quite fit around you, I think all of that makes sometimes causes mental health struggles and issues. And I think if then on top of that, you've got the whole fame thing that artists struggle with. Think back to people like Amy Winehouse and Kurt Cobain. They always just wanted to make the music. They didn't want all of this extra stuff that comes with the fame.
Mm,
So that's like an added layer, isn't it? That's like more pressure.
mm.
So
From an artist's point of view in this day and age as well, if
mm,
you're trying to do it online and you've got the social media aspects, and
yeah, yeah,
and you get that, I think the more famous you get, the more you get people having a go as well. Not everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
You get a
Yeah,
lot of support.
yeah, but you open yourself up to that. And I think because what you're doing is so vulnerable, it's you, isn't it, that you're putting on a
Mm,
page or a painting or in a song,
mm,
then have people attack that. It's extremely personal, isn't
mm,
it?
mm.
So,
So part of what happens and we're sort of changing, it feels like changing the subject, but it's not. It's all connected,
it's all
isn't it?
related, yeah.
Um, you need to build up resilience as
Mm,
well.
yes. Yeah, but still have that vulnerability.
And I think sometimes what happens with the musicians is some of them that are successful quite quickly are launched into it without the years of building up, which
Yeah.
actually almost help. Well, that helps you with resilience, and you become.
It does when something happens too soon. It's like it's a Scottish guy called Lewis Capaldi. I don't know whether you've seen the documentary on him, but
Didn't see the documentary, but I've heard about it.
yeah, he became really famous really young, but he'd done a lot of songwriting before that. He'd spent years and years building up this collection and then, released this amazing album that obviously connected with people.
Mhm.
Um, and then got signed to a major record label. And then they were like, we're going to send you to the US. And he's expected to make like the same quality album in like a couple of weeks.
Mm.
And it just killed him because he couldn't do it under that pressure in that time frame.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's all
And
that.
that can happen to us in a certain extent to artists that are taken on by art publishers, and
Yeah.
where suddenly they're expected to do a lot of
Yeah.
art. And I'm not saying that. I mean, it's fabulous if that happens, but it's got its own set of issues when you actually do. In fact, I've had a little bit of fear of success, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that might be another episode, actually.
And I
It's,
think that that also makes me think about also the definition of success that we live
mm,
in now, because I think that's probably changed compared to what it used to be. It's very much focused on financial selling, isn't it?
mm.
Being popular with the masses.
And I feel actually that needs to change generally because I think
Yeah.
that we've sort of come into this, it's quite a high pressured world. Because I would say that what I'm doing now, I'm loving.
Yeah.
So, and we did it to ourselves, didn't we? At the beginning of this year, we wanted Art Hub to move a bit quicker than it is. It's there, it's happening, but we wanted it to more people, and we started to do a little bit of
We put pressure on
writing.
ourselves, didn't
Yeah,
we?
we did. We
Yeah.
did. And we decided to stop doing that and just enjoy
Yeah.
it. We
Yeah,
come,
because I think when you come from that place, you come from that sort of energy of trying to push something. Quite often you make bad decisions from that place as well, don't you? Instead of like going with the flow and like
mm,
tapping into your intuition and
mm.
like feeling your way through it. Um,
And sometimes, because you don't take the time to stop and think where you are, and just
yeah.
like stop and look at your
And what
lovely,
you've
you're in Brighton, you've the
yeah,
sun's out,
yeah.
yeah, but not too hot today.
I know it's a bit cooler today, which is nice. It's nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And looking at my lovely studio, and
Yeah.
actually, it's really good. So
Yeah.
there's a lot. From the point of view of the starving artist, though. So if we come back to with Van Gogh, we were saying before we started going live because we thought we were talking about that he actually was in a mental health institution at one point and
Yeah.
produced a prolific amount of work, including things like Starry Night, because that was the view from his room.
Yeah.
And when you think of mental institutions in those times, you think of them as terrible, but his brother had paid for this institution. They provided him with canvases and paint. He could paint all day. He could go out, he could walk. It almost sounds idyllic in a weird sort of mental institution way. But, it's because I'm sure that it wasn't all that, but he did just paint and paint.
It was part of his therapy, wasn't it? For him
It
to do that.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really forward thinking.
Yeah. And I think my point was you were saying that he at the time he was in touch with a lot of artists and the movement and all
Yeah,
of that.
yeah,
And they were becoming quite successful, and that
yeah,
did include Van Gogh. And
yeah,
yet you have this starving artist myth.
yeah,
He wasn't his family, he wasn't starving because he was in this very expensive
yeah,
institution.
yeah.
And you
He had
think
his family support, didn't he? And he had
he
other
did.
artists around him that were part of this really sort of breaking through and creating new art. Um, and sort of, you know, um, if you think about if we think about the definition of success, well, it's like how amazing that these artists came together and created something that was so new and so different from the kind of the Renaissance and the period that had gone before it. That surely that's a huge success to change like the art world and the
It
way that
must have
we
been
look at
incredibly
art.
exciting. It's a little bit
Yeah.
like when rock and roll came in.
Yeah, yeah, it was a huge shift. Yeah,
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 yeah. All these there are big, sudden big shifts you don't necessarily realize at the time.
yeah, yeah. And they also broke through because um they were not part of the traditional institutions. So in terms of artists that went before them, it was quite often to do with like family heritage, where you were from, and very kind of prestigious backgrounds. Whereas these groups of artists were doing it for the love of it, for the joy of it. So for them to be able to break through all of that as well, all of that sort of noise, because if you imagine, it must have been incredibly difficult back then to make any kind of impact in the art world if you were away from the establishment, Even
Mm.
more so than now, I imagine, because of
Oh, definitely
social
more so than
structures
now.
would have been a lot more kind of set in stone, wouldn't they?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the I think peer support does make it easier. I didn't realize just how important it is to have other artists around you.
Yeah, it's hugely important to be able to like have those sorts of conversations and have support from them and keep each other
Yeah.
going as well, because
I
it's
had a lovely chat because we did art and stone, and that is basically, sorry, sketch and stone. So we went to Stone that's near to us, a place, and they've got a community centre, a heritage centre, and they had some paintings on display that were of stone. And you could like escape from the heat because it was on Friday, it was hot. Um, and as well as so everybody went out. So people were just invited to come and sketch in stone, which we did. So we went out and sketched, and I met Sheila Adams. Sheila Adams. I hope I've got her name right. Who I've always admired her work, and we were just chatting, and then I'm like, and she was like, yes. And we were just chat, and we just were like chat, 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 because it was just about art.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and different materials that she likes using or different, and it was just lovely. It was just
yeah,
lovely. She's gone through a fairy phase. Just she said she's always painted fairies, but she's gone through this phase of painting fairies different intricately and people that she's turned into fairies, like her family and things. Absolutely lovely, really lovely. And just I think because of the isolating, we're doing a lot of chatting this morning, aren't we? And
yeah,
but it's chatting around the subject
yeah,
because I feel that this starving artist idea, it ties into the lone wolf. It ties into everything. It's almost like a, it's this whole struggle of becoming an
yes,
artist.
yeah. That's a good word, actually, Debs, to describe that kind of myth that sits around being
Yeah,
an artist. That it's It's
And I
hard.
think what we're trying to say is it is difficult sometimes, but it doesn't have to be a struggle.
Yeah, yeah,
Financially, it can actually be a struggle sometimes.
yeah, it can be. And I think part of the reason why is well, it takes a long time to get good at art, doesn't it? Quite often, a lot of artists don't get famous or any sort of recognition until they're sort of 40 plus. And I think that's got to do with a lot to do with life experience as well, I think. How you express yourself and having that rich life experience to express. Um,
I think it's also the fact that you're self-employed because what you do is you're building, you've got to build sort of some
yeah,
collections, you've got to do all of that up front.
you have,
Um,
you have,
and I'm sure that's exactly the same with other businesses that you have to
yeah,
put in up front.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and and that's not seen as a starving business. You know, it could be a very
No,
successful business.
I think part the other thing is as well, like there's not really a blueprint to being an artist, is there? Like there's so many different ways that you can do it and so many different things that you can be
Even
involved in.
more so now in
Oh,
this.
massively. Yeah, it can be quite overwhelming at times. So like you could choose to be involved in the community and do community artwork and get funding that way. Um, you can choose to be more focused on private collectors collecting your work. And there's all different kind of markets of audience as well, isn't there? So
Mm.
it's huge before
It's
you
huge,
even,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you can
And
do
you,
art licensing where you have things that are repeated.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and printed on demand. You've got to just feel your way through that and find the right place for you, haven't you? And that's not
which
easy.
takes time.
Yeah.
Therefore, that's sort of this is where we sort of understand the starving artist bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what we're probably saying we're not agreeing with, or I am anyway, is that it has to be a struggle. It can be a real pleasure to actually go through all of the stages that you have to go through. You couldn't go from absolutely nothing to producing collections, getting all your postage and packaging right, getting everything all right
Yeah.
on your marketing, doing all of that. You couldn't do that overnight, could you?
No way. No, no, it takes time.
Yes. Even if you've been to art school, it
Yeah.
takes time.
Yeah, exactly. It does, because what they don't really teach you in art school is the kind of the business aspect to it. So
Mm.
you learn a lot about techniques, about developing ideas, about art practice, but
Mm.
not necessarily about what you need to do to turn it into an actual career. I think the other thing that's interesting about the art market at the moment, I almost feel like we've divided it into super rich. You know, you see these auctions going on, more and more you see artwork going for higher and higher and higher prices.
Mm.
And then you've got the kind of I suppose the middle of the road art going on. A lot of people um, have found success through social media now, which is something that we should talk about a little bit because that's opened up more doors for people to be able to sell their artwork, reach a higher audience without the need to go through lots of galleries and the kind of the traditional route. So I think that's helped people a lot. But the super rich are kind of collecting artwork for the value of it, aren't they? So they see it more of like an
Yeah, a commodity.
investment rather than something that they necessarily connect to. So it might be like a trendy artist. Um, what was really interesting, I don't know whether you saw this, Debs, I think it was about a year or so ago now. Banksy sold a print at one of these auctions for a ridiculous amount of money. And then after it had sold, the hammer went down, it went through the paper shredder.
Yeah, I did see that, yeah.
And what I found fascinating about that was it actually went up in
Up.
value after
And
that.
right, and this is where, from the starving artist point of view, And I actually originally called this episode like what happens to, does your art only become valuable after you die? I think what happens is it's the rarity of it. So when you do die, if you are very popular, then
Yeah.
you can't paint any more paintings. So therefore your paintings become more valuable for
Yeah,
that
because it's a
reason.
scarcity. Yeah, yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely that.
Which is different from the fact that you're starving during your lifetime.
Yes, yeah. And I actually think we're probably at a time where um there's a lot of famous living artists. You've
Mm,
got people like Damien Hirst, who's
mm,
must be at least a millionaire.
mm,
Um, he became famous in the 90s, didn't he, with people like Tracy Emin. Again, another very famous artist who, makes a good living from what she does. Um, and then you've got the likes of Banksy, who's in like mainstream culture. Um, and there's a lot of artists that are kind of copycat Banksys as well. So I think we are at a time where you see famous artists making a good living. David
mm.
Hockney's another example. He's like hugely famous, successful, still alive.
And also a lot of artists that are more mid-range artists doing art for themselves, and but they make very good livings as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so and there's probably more artists making a living now, do you think?
It'd be interesting to find out the stats, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
I think
because we don't
so.
know this. We just don't.
No, it's just a feeling. Maybe
Mm,
it's because you're seeing more on social media and things like that from people who are doing it as a job. Um, yeah, it'd be interesting to find out, wouldn't it, how much I know that like the creative sector in the UK it's for a long time it's always been the fastest growing sector. It's always been actually the most valuable, but in terms of the bigger picture of value, so we're talking about community, we're talking about mental health,
mm,
problem solving, resilience, all of these things that creativity brings. It's been recognised for a long time that it's got a lot of value, a lot of economic value to people.
mm.
Um,
Yes, because you find more cultured societies do have the arts is very much front and center really
yeah.
as well.
And you also find as well as certain areas geographically, Brighton's a really good example. It's always drawn a lot of artists to it. It's always been a hub for creativity and inclusivity
Mm,
and expression, not just visual
yes,
arts. It's got a lot going on.
yeah.
Um, as it's become more popular in that sense, it's become more trendy and thus house prices have rocketed. Um, it's become more and more expensive. And what's interesting is I think it's reaching a point where artists are still trying to survive here because of the high prices of everything.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
That's a
but it's quite
of
hard
the
to
artist
actually.
being there in the first place. So
Yes.
don't push the artists out. That's what makes it attractive to people is that vibrancy that it's got.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
And other places I think have experienced similar things.
You find in some places as well that are very popular, like I know that in Cornwall, the young are moving out because they can't afford to actually be there.
Yeah.
That's separate from art, but yeah,
Well, it's separate, but Cornwall's always been a place, hasn't it, for artists
it
because of
has.
the light
Mm,
and because of the landscape down there. So it attracts a lot of painters, I think, Cornwall, doesn't it?
mm, yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. So I think we're covering quite a lot actually, Ruth.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a broader one because because it ties into so many things, which I hadn't really thought about when we did this. Thought it might be quite a short episode, but it's it's quite deeper levels of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. So, do we want to cover anything about artists now? And
Sorry.
do we want to cover anything about artists now, or do we think that we've covered enough this episode and we could come back another time? Is there anything that have you got a takeaway? Have you got anything that you think to
I
round it
My
up?
takeaway that I've really been thinking about whilst we've been talking is the value and how we define value, and that links to kind of our idea of success, doesn't it? And I
Mm,
think I've always thought this, like defining things purely by monetary value is a little bit, just scratches the surface, really. It doesn't really explain the whole value around art and creativity. So, quite often, like we said at the top of the episode, people will hold themselves back from being creative because they think it's not going to make them successful. But actually, if you think about the bigger picture about what creativity brings to your life, it can bring like minded people, mindfulness, it gives you a way to express yourself, all of these things. Think about the value and success in that rather than making money. And the other thing is quite often when you find your thing that you really love to enjoy, that will naturally lead to being able to make a living from it. But
mm.
we're just not told that at school, are we? So,
No, and when you actually follow your passion, and the thing with the art nowadays is that you can create what you want to do, if that makes sense. So you can create a business around what it is that you want to do, because if you want to, you can do teaching. If you want to, you can go sketching. If you want to, you could, and then it's just how you actually make money from that. But
mm,
it's sort of choice. And I think at the beginning, it's sifting through all the choices is the hard
mm,
bit.
mm,
But also, that's quite a pleasurable thing because you
mm,
start to actually hone in on what it is that you really enjoy doing. And I think that happiness is something that sometimes you strive to get more and more and more in life because that's what's going to make you happy. Whereas when you're being creative, it's more like you're being rather than
mm.
striving to get more.
Yeah,
And so, and that will make you fulfilled, I suppose, which ultimately is a happier life, really. Because
yeah,
if you can be fulfilled, even if you do struggle sometimes with money, particularly at the beginning of a business, um, it still makes for a more interesting, fulfilled life. And what else do you want?
definitely, definitely. And there is evidence actually that once you reach a certain salary and you've got that comfort level and that stability, if you go above and beyond that, the happiness doesn't change that
Yeah,
much, you know. So,
no. Because
yeah.
it can be miserable if you can't do the things that you want to do.
Yeah, there's a level of comfort, isn't there, with having
Yeah.
that financial stability.
Mm,
Um, but above and beyond that, when it's just more numbers in the bank, it's like, what's the point, you know?
mm. And going back to the original question of starving artist, um, what we're actually saying is, as long as you've got enough to eat, so to speak,
Yeah.
then that might not be the emphasis you want to put
Yeah.
on what you're doing.
On success, think about all of the other things that it brings. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yes, which I think rounds the episode up really nicely.
Because that's a nice way to end it, isn't it?
It is, it is. So goodbye for this week. We're not going to see you on Friday. We'll see you next Friday. Okay? On Ruth's channel. All right.
Yeah. See you
Bye for
soon. Take
now.
care. Bye bye.
See you soon. Bye.